I am one of your co-hosts today, Griff Krembrink. I am a vice president here at Thoughtium. I lead our learning and development function and practice area, as well as I lead our recently opened West Coast office. So I'm very privileged to be part of the conversation here today. And just as a reminder, Navigating Now is a platform where a whole host of community of leaders from different industries, different functions, different perspectives are coming together to offer a little bit of insight and their point of view on things, issues, and events as the world continues to change and swirl around us. So just a reminder, Navigating Now is coming to you this Thursday at 3 p.m. Central, as it always does. We will have another episode next week, next Thursday, 3 p.m. Central, 1 p.m. Pacific. And I believe that's 4 a.m. Singapore time for the folks who might be joining us overseas. So thanks everyone for being here. Now let's get into a little bit of where we've been. So if you remember, if you've been around for a few of the last conversations, we introduced the platform of Thoughtium Perspectives as a little bit of a sub-platform to Navigating Now. And the first foray that we really focused into within Thoughtium Perspectives was in an issue that's in front of all of us, this idea of what the world of hybrid work will look like. And so we spent a lot of time in conversation, curating insights, listening to all of you as we've gone through these conversations. Just to do a quick round of highlights, because some of the conversations we've had have led us personally to some pretty big breakthroughs, and are setting the stage for a really nice session and a conversation today. So a couple weeks ago on July 8th, Anjana Raj and Anthony Ewing talked a little bit about the current state of affairs as it related to a post-pandemic. And honestly, right now with everything going around with the new variants of coronavirus, we can't really say post-pandemic. We just know that there continues to be change. And we know that there are certain expectations of a workforce that has been through a lot over the last 14 to 16 months. So we unpacked a lot of those expectations. We talked about how do we approach the conversations? What does it take to start those conversations? And we circled in on the idea of courage, being really clear with expectations, and being really clear with commitment to continue to revisit the conversation moving forward. So that's where we started on July 8th. We came back together last week. We added myself, we added Aaron Fleckenstein, and we added Margot Masood to the conversation to talk a little bit about, this is an opportunity for all of us as organizations and as teams to hit the reset button and really to think about redefining what it means to be effective in our jobs, in our work environments. And can we start to revisit some of those principles we've ascribed to for so long? A lot of the things we talked about in that conversation related back to the empathetic approach we discussed in the first episode. We also talked about making this a collaborative experience and initiative so that everyone felt that collective sense of ownership. And the last thing we said was, let's keep it real. Let's talk about this in a personal context because it is a personal issue. So how do we get a little bit closer to the core of how everyone is feeling and is affected by this to have those real conversations to push us forward? That brings us to an exciting end to this part of our Thoughtium Perspectives, but definitely not an end to the conversation. Today is going to be a lot about action. So we're not going to spend as much time diving into data and insights, but we're going to talk a little bit about a few conversations that, if taken on by your team at any level, can provide a lot of impact for you as an individual and for your team at large. Joining me in the conversation is Madison Wright. Madison is a consultant here at Thoughtium. And she sits in the learning and development practice, but I would say, Madison, your role within Thoughtium is much broader than that, right? You are a little bit of our design guru. You tend to take on experiences with a really strong user experience in mind. So Madison, it's fantastic. I'm really looking forward to this conversation together. I'll throw it over to you just to do a quick intro as well.
Yeah, thank you, Griff, and Navigating Now community. I'm really excited to be joining y'all. What is really sticking out to me, Griff, about the conversation today is this shift from understanding the context to really starting to shape how individuals and teams can really take action as we've done that hard work to build our understanding and build empathy. So I love being in this space of understanding how we can learn and how we can communicate to effectively meet our goals, be that as ambitious strategy that we set forward or making our team even better than it is. So that's a space I love to be in. And I know we've done a lot of legwork with our team in the past few weeks and even couple of months to really dive into this conversation. We've done it right, we've done it wrong, we've had hard conversations, and a lot of today is a retrospective on our experience as well as advice that we can give to leaders as they have these conversations as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it's a really good insight too. One of the things I think is popped for all of us within our company walls is the need to practice, as we say, practice what we teach, and to ensure that we're not just giving great ideas for people to go try, but we're trying them on ourselves and really starting to see what the personal impact is of those journeys. And I think, before we even get into the toolkit itself, that I know we're gonna talk about, Madison, I'd be curious, and maybe you can let some of our listeners and our followers here know a little bit about what has that journey felt like when we've gone through some of these harder conversations, some of these areas that we don't necessarily always shine light onto in our work environments. What has that been like?
Yeah, I can first speak to, I think, the feelings that a lot of our team has experienced. So at first, it was definitely curiosity. And then ambition to get started into this conversation. And then we kind of had that excitement that fueled us to say, hey, we really want to have these conversations with our clients. We also, before we show up and lead in a client setting, we also really want to practice and, figure this out for ourselves. And then as I, teed up, those conversations were really hard. And we definitely, we uncovered some things that we really needed to talk about as a team, and we're continuing to talk about. So we leaned into those hard conversations. That was difficult. Emotions were high at times, and people were, I think everyone had a bit of confusion. And what is most important about that is we figured out that those were the conversations that we needed to have. And as things just continue to change in this roller coaster of change, I'm really glad that we surfaced those conversations. What that allowed us to do was also to really pivot into, again, what today's all about: taking action, putting a plan into place that addresses those things that are hard and addresses the things that we're ambitious about and the things that we want to build moving forward. So it has truly been a journey, and I know for us it's just starting. And I also know, after having had this conversation, we're super excited to continue to talk with our community about what those conversations might look like outside of Thoughtium and for others as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate the use of the word journey. I would say one of the big insights I've had just in being in these conversations, recognizing the difficulty, recognizing the personal nature, is the need to take water breaks, right? Actually give yourself a chance to step away, internalize and digest a lot of the things we're discussing, because it can create some visceral emotions, and we can definitely share those with each other, but we also owe it to each other to be able to step away and come back with maybe a little bit of a fresher lens to continue forward. And I think we'll obviously unpack that a little bit as we get into what we're calling the Work 2.0 conversation toolkit looks like, right?
I love that idea of water breaks, and I think that is so needed as we do this.
Yeah. So for Madison and Griff, stay hydrated as you go through this conversation toolkit, right? So before we even introduce the conversation toolkit, which I know folks are probably really excited to get into, but one of our core beliefs is definitely thinking about what can people get out of this. So Madison, from the designer's perspective, from thinking about the end in mind, with this Work 2.0 conversation toolkit, what can an individual or a team who takes out this toolkit and puts it to use, what can they expect, or what can they see as outcomes from going through some of these conversations?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can say, first and foremost, that journey that our team went on, they can expect that their team will go on a journey of those great, impactful, and difficult and insightful conversations as well. So definitely the journey of starting with building empathy and understanding to reimagining what is possible in the way that people work together on a team, and then getting to a really clear go forward plan, and not a final go forward plan, but a clear one that people are committed to trying out and then also revisiting. So I'd say that's the cadence that at the end of our time today, I would love for people to feel like, hey, I can take my team on that journey. I would also love for people to, I hope, feel prepared for those conversations. And with this, this is the theme of this episode is we really want people to feel like they have a place to start. They can put this into action. This is not just a theoretical conversation that we've heard bits about from our leadership, from podcasts, from the news, but this is something that you're like, hey, tomorrow I can put this plan into place. I can have these conversations with my team, and I am an owner of this conversation.
Yeah, I love that. I think one of the things you and I have discussed is it's so easy to fall into the lens of I want to become an expert, and then maybe this toolkit might help me further along in that journey. But how do we think about this as less about becoming experts and more about just being diligent experimenters? And I believe, some of these things we put together are going to give people a sense of what that will look like. So without further ado, why don't we show a little bit of the toolkit to everyone so they can see what we're so excited about? How does that sound?
Let's do it.
All right. So without further ado, what we're going to be sharing with you today is what we're calling the Work 2.0 Conversation Toolkit. Now, there's going to be a lot more information on this tomorrow and into next week at Thoughtium.com/perspectives. One of the things Madison and I just want to be really clear about is feel free to reach out to us directly if you'd like to have questions. If you take on the toolkit and you have some interesting reflections you'd like to share with our community, we're definitely we're very interested in hearing not only how these conversations go, but how can we share insights as all of us are collectively going on this journey of uncertainty in the workplace. So Madison, let's talk a little bit about what goes into the conversation, the 2.0 conversation toolkit. So walk us through a little bit of what these conversations look like.
Yeah. So this is the grand reveal of what we'll be walking through. And this is really, like I said, this is a journey from building empathy and understanding to walking away with a working agreement that you're committed to trying. So this is the result of what we tried internally and what we're ready to talk with others about having as well. So these are 4 distinct conversations that you can have. And the way that we've organized them is in that way of the journey that following, the journey, having these conversations in sequence can be really impactful. But each of these conversations are on its own also a highly beneficial and important conversation that can be had. So these stand alone as well. I'll walk you through just at the highest level what is happening in each of these conversations that teams can have to really, define the future of work for them. So the very first one is recognizing that we have all gone through just a heck of a time. And having an opportunity to revisit, rediscover, and explore our individual values is a really good place to start. It's really hard to talk about who are we, what is important to us as a team as we move forward before we've identified what's important to me in my life, what do I value? So this conversation is really focused on discovering and reflecting on your values, and then also recognizing how that shows up in the team environment. This looks at at 2 pieces. What are my individual values? What are my team values? And what's the space in between those 2 that we're all realistically existing in? The next one, exploring hybrid. It's all about exploring new possibilities and doing that exciting idea generation work. You can think of coming up with as many ideas as you can, not just limiting yourself to how many numbers of days of a week will I go into the office, but really thinking bigger and more creatively than that. Third one is pressure testing. Griff, I know that this one is your big passion, so please jump in if you want to summarize it. But this is about not just painting the beautiful rosy picture for our future state, but also thinking backwards in ways that we might misstep, ways that plausible reasons for failure. Recognizing those ways that we might fail and also being able to come up with ideas for how we address those as well. All of that, that empathy, the ideation, the understanding plausible reasons for failure, that really culminates into creating a single working agreement. You keep it simple, your team aligns to it, and you definitely commit to iterating on it. So that's the cadence, and I'm sure you can see as I went through that description that each of these conversations is itself powerful, and even more powerful when you put them all together.
Well, thanks so much for that intro, and I'm sure folks are really excited to see even what goes into each one of these sections. And I know we'll spend a little time unpacking each one, talk a little bit about why it's in there, what it can do, what to expect, and even potentially what to watch out for as you start on these conversations with your team. But Madison, I think you kind of alluded to it, but even to come back, I mean, you look at these 4 conversations. Maybe there are some leaders out there who are saying, look, we have so many things on our plate already. I can't imagine trying to set up 4 different conversations all in a row. It sounds great. What would you say to a leader who says, I got 90 minutes to 2 hours on a Wednesday to get some value out of something like this? What would you say to someone in that position?
Yeah. To someone in that position, I would first ask the hard question of, for these conversations, do you really only have 90 minutes, or is this something that you will make a higher priority and open up time for your team to focus on that? So I would first push back a little bit and say, are you really only giving 90 minutes to talk about your team's future of work? But let's say someone was saying, hey, I want to start with 90 minutes. I don't want to commit to more than that at first. Then I would definitely encourage them to think about, what has your team been talking about so far? Where is the company at in terms of coming up with ideas? Where is your team at in terms of what they need? So I would even go to a team member and ask, hey, I'm thinking about a few of these different topics. What do you think we need most right now? And starting with one of those. I can imagine, as we experienced, once you have a 90-minute conversation with a functional team, you wrap up at the end of it saying, wow, we have a lot more to talk about. And so I would imagine you would get that second one scheduled. Please also, you mentioned water breaks. These should not all happen in a week or in a company offsite when everyone gets back together. This should happen over time, one a week, one every other week, and give people time to digest and reflect, because this is a long-term commitment about how you'll be working together.
All right. So what I'm hearing you say is definitely can be valuable in 2 hours, but if someone's going to come to you with that request, they better have a very thoughtful response on why they only have 90 minutes to 2 hours to have these kind of conversations.
Yeah. There would be a bigger conversation to be had if someone said, I only have 90 minutes to talk about my team's future.
Well said. Well said. I'll definitely have to make sure I'm coming to you with very thoughtful responses, not just around this, but other topics as well as we continue our working relationship.
I like that.
So Madison, let's jump into the first conversation, discovering values. And I think you hit a little bit on the importance of leading with empathy. But just taking it even a step further, we think about a conversation around values discovery. Why would a team get a lot of value out of starting with values?
Mm-hmm. This is a big question about, how do your individual values show up at work? Oftentimes when we are in the weeds of doing our day-to-day work, it can feel like just going through the motions. I think you can think of yourself as, you're out on the field and I'm sorry to use a sports analogy, this is where I'm going. But if you're out in the field, you're putting everything out there, and then you pick up your head and you don't remember what took you to the field to begin with, what ambition you had, what drive for team and community put you out there. If you forget all of those things, then you'll pick yourself up from like the middle of the game and say, like, what the heck am I doing? Why am I putting myself out on the line? Why am I practicing so much? Why am I doing all this work if I've lost touch with why I came onto the field to begin with? So re-identifying your values and just rediscovering and reflecting on them is the opportunity for everyone to say, like, why am I here? What's important to me? What brings me out onto the fictitious field, or what brings me into the workplace? And Once people are, able to reconnect with that, then they can frame, what they're doing in the lens of that and ask themselves, is what I'm doing lining up to my values? When there is a disconnect, you feel disconnected. And we want to make sure that people have that connection with how they're spending their days.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is a combination of getting back in touch with what are the things that are most important to me, and what do I really want to be highlighting in my day to day, especially as we think about our work and our life blending together, as we've talked about, but also tying that back to the mission of the team, of the organization, and doing a little bit of that soul searching, that realignment to say, how is what I care about showing up in what we do on a day-to-day basis? And if it's not necessarily, is that a broader conversation that gets led down another path?
Absolutely. And I'll tell you a little bit more about how we structured this conversation to lead from the individual values, what has brought me to the field, what's brought me into the work, and then how that exists with the broader team, because all the other people out on the field also have their own individual values that brought them there. So the tool that we started with for identifying individual values is from Brene Brown's Dare to Lead. She has a chapter, and it walks you through the process of identifying your top two values. It's a wild process. She has a paper with 100 values on it. And then you're reading through them. It's like, wow, these all sound good. And the challenge and the cadence that you walk through is going from 100 values down to 10, which is pretty easy, but then down to 5, and finally down to just 2. People come into the conversation that we have around values with just 2 values. And then they really share out, what was that experience of getting down to 2? Tell me, what is it about those 2 values that are most important to you? So we really start with the individual, but it's not just individuals out there. We are operating as a team. And so then we start to transition into, how do values show up as a team? That transition starts with an interpersonal conversation. So for example, Grift, you and I would talk about how our values could benefit each other in the way that we work together, as well as where we might have tension or challenges because of our different values as we work together. From there, and reflection around that topic, we really then start to think about, okay, we all have individual values, they interact with each other every day, but there are broader team values as well. Those values might be shaped from leaders who are very influential in the organization, from the type of work, from the things that clients value. There's all of these things that exist within our working atmosphere that kind of manifests as what the workplace and what your team collectively values. Our intern, Ava Pomerantz, developed the idea of calling this space in between individual and team values the liminal space. The liminal space is not someplace that it's not a journey. You don't have an endpoint, but you are just existing in it, and you are okay with existing in that. And realistically, in the workplace, I am not only existing within my values, I'm not only existing within the team's values, but I'm somewhere in between those. And we really talk about what it means to exist in that space and how to build empathy for each other, demonstrate it, make it a part of our work when we are in that liminal space. Yeah. Grift, I know.
Yes.
I put that conversation flow together, and I facilitated for our broader team what that looked like. I know that you were a participant in that in actually your first few weeks at Thoughtium. So I'd love to hear from you. Tell us, what were the values that you arrived at? And then what was your experience like, especially, joining the team as a new person? What was your experience like having that conversation?
Yeah, I think a lot of the things you mentioned, Madison, really came to life for me. And one of the things, for the folks that are listening in, either live right now or to this recording, in this conversation is a chance for people to do some serious reflection, but it's also a chance for people to get re-energized. And I know for me, the 2 values I really started to circle around were curiosity and courage. And as I thought about those, I instantly started to think, how can I bring those to the workplace to really light up not just what I want to be a part of, but how do I use those to help my colleagues? How do I use those to help my direct reports? How do I make those more my superpowers, as opposed to thinking of that values activity as, hey, I'm limiting myself to just a few things. I think when you start to strip back a lot of the things that you say you care about, but you really get to the core, for me, it was just a re-energizing activity, and it really made me kind of filled with purpose to go into these deeper conversations too, right? When we think about how do we start from that bedrock and then get into the authentic and the vulnerable space that we need to get to be better and working more effectively as a team. So for me, re-energizing, recommitting, and also a piece of reflection as well.
This is I think, a great call out. So many teams do a great job of identifying their team values. And you had an opportunity to come in with your individual values and just determine how those impacted that team values and how you could use those to benefit the broader team, rather than, being pushed across the table. Here are our company values, go and live these out in your work. You were able to think about the intersection of those a lot more.
Yeah. And I think, as a natural segue, I think this was a great place for us to start to then get into that second conversation, right? So let's talk a little bit about exploring hybridity, and what it is that we really mean when we say to build the hybrid workspace for your own team moving forward.
Yeah, perfect. So as a recap for the exploring hybrid conversation, this is where you're really thinking of what is possible. So not what was happening before COVID, not how we were working during, but how we can shape this future state. I know a lot of our past conversations were talking about the new possibilities, and Grift, I know you also did a phenomenal job of really, stepping in and leading this conversation of what might this look like. So I'd love to hear from you. Why is this definition important? Why is now the time to do it?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of looking at the conversation as a reflection mechanism, but I think it's also being real about what we've seen over the last 12 to 14 months. And I think what we've seen has been, frankly, a lot of disproving of myths that we believed to be true. And we talked about this in the last episode. And just for those folks who are listening out there, if you haven't had a chance to watch the first two parts of this Perspectives experience, they are up on our YouTube channel. But one of the things we mentioned in our last conversation was around sort of the myth of productivity happening in the walls of offices, right? And so we actually saw that most people, even though facing a set of odds that a lot of us have never faced in such a global chaotic scene, thought that we were doing our jobs as well or even better, more productively than we had in the past. And so I think using that framework, not so much as saying, hey, how do we get back to the things that we used to do because we thought that was the right way to do it? But when you set up this conversation, you can really start to explore what in-person means to the success of your team. And so as we look at the actual activity flow that we went through, one of the things we asked our teams is to define in-person in a way that says, what do we actually do that is better in person? And let's unpack that. And what do we actually do that might not necessarily be serviced most effectively in person? And we had a chance to give our ideas. Obviously, again, we didn't necessarily always agree on what was better in person or what was better, at home or remote. But again, it's great to have those conversations because you get really a sense of how people feel like they can do their jobs most effectively. And then we started to converge a little bit more, and we said, okay, these are how we feel about in person. And this is how we can start to reassociate what good and better looks like. What do we have to have in person? And it's not what is better. What do we need to be in person? And to strip away, again, just the better versus worse gives people a chance to really come back. It almost kind of aligns nicely to that values conversation, right? Where it's what is the core of what we need to do together, but then how do we give people the ability to build in the flexibility that they need in their life, whether it be for work circumstances, whether it be for life circumstances, so that they feel like they can show up every day and do their best work. So I think, Madison, I would love to get your perspective too, because I was facilitating that session for us. We went through and there was a lot of thoughts, a lot of discussion. How was that experience on the side of the participant?
Yeah. What I really experienced was there were moments of alignment where, we all agreed that heads down work is best when we're on our own. But then moments of misalignment when we weren't all thinking the same thing. And so I was able to actually, as people explain the different perspectives that they were coming forward with what's better, what's worse, when should we definitely be in person, when should we work remotely, it didn't stop at the surface level conversation. I really got to learn more about what was going on with people's lives and what were like the drivers behind that. And the motivations, not just the request of I want to work this way or I want to work that way, but really building a deeper why. So that was the biggest benefit of that conversation, was just really better understanding where my coworkers were coming from.
Yeah, and Madison, I'll just build on that. One of the things I thought was really interesting, when we do planning exercises, I think sometimes we fall prey to thinking on everything as a timeline. And I think when you do this exploration activity, for me, what really popped is that when we use the statement when, it became less about just saying, hey, you need to be in the office 3 days a week. And it became much more situation, moment based. And I think people reflect that, they react to that in a lot more positive sense, because we can really start to think, what are those moments that, again, to your point, what are those moments where we absolutely have to be in person together? And it's not so much saying it has to be Tuesday through Thursday or it has to be Monday through Wednesday, but we can be really clear on what the situations are and why that is. What is the impact of us actually carving out that time? So I think for me, it was reorienting when away from timelines to impact and situation.
So that brings me to a question. Let's say someone's listening and their C-suite has passed down a directive for what the hybrid work policy is, and maybe it has some of those scenarios and how to navigate them. What is the role of a team in still having this conversation? What's the benefit? Why have it if something's already in writing?
So I'll preface this by saying, we believe that organizations should definitely include their people in those types of rollouts. And I think a lot of the great organizations do. If, the situation precedes itself that there are sort of generic situations, here is what our corporate policy is, that's actually fine. And I think, one of the things we're laying out in this conversation toolkit is that we know not everyone is approaching this from the same situation. There are industry barriers, there are workplace barriers, geography barriers, all those exist. We still think there's a ton of value in getting together as a team, no matter how big or small your team is, and really trying to personalize those. Because just having words on paper that are generic enough to go across the entire organization, it's not going to feel personalized enough for your team. And without that extra step of collaboration, you lose the ability for everyone to buy in, and you lose that ability for that co-authorship, that co-ownership feeling. So that even though, some organizations might be ahead and they might be having these things well documented, personally, I think, and I would love to get your thoughts on this, but I think the conversations are still extremely valuable because there's always that extra 5% you can go to make it that much more clear for your team or for your direct function.
I think you are spot on when you're saying it's an opportunity to illustrate and to unpack what those words actually mean, what they mean to the real work that you're doing for your real team and your real people. So making it more than just words on a page. This is where I think, I know we transitioned into a hard conversation, which was starting to look and ask the question of what are the plausible reasons for failure? And this was, this is what the next conversation on the journey of, okay, we've thought about what's possible. Where might we go wrong? So Griff, I know that this conversation is one that you are passionate about. So I think the question on anyone's mind is why are we talking about failure? We haven't even gotten started. We should really be setting ourselves up for success rather than planning to fail. So why does this process work? Why should people be talking about failing at the hybrid model?
Yeah, I think, Madison, you're setting me up to be the gloomier co-host here that says, why don't we talk about the rainier days, or maybe I'm Chicken Little in this conversation. But in all seriousness, there's a lot of data that backs talking about concerns, challenges early in the process. And we call this pressure testing. You might have heard it called pre-mortem elsewhere. The concept is pretty simple. It's giving people the chance to look out in the future and talk about failure in a pragmatic environment. And obviously, honestly, a lot of times when we have these hard conversations and we're exploring what's possible, we get really nervous talking about the challenges, and sometimes we kind of fall prey to groupthink because we don't want to rock the boat. People seem to be having this great momentum. Oh, there's so many things that we're accomplishing in these exploration conversations. But the reality is, for a lot of folks in the room, there could be a lot of swirling doubts. There could be a lot of swirling concerns. There could be a lot of swirling fears. What an activity like pressure testing does is it opens up the communication lines for people to be bringing those fears, bringing those challenges that are top of mind into an arena that is almost like you're creating deja vu, right? So you're looking at the things that are potentially happening in the future. But as a team now, you can start to actually plan and ideate for ways to get around those hurdles before you even come to them. Whereas what we know to be true is when you are working through them in the field, that adds such a level of stress trying to solve the problem. And I think it's pretty obvious to say out loud, right? When we try to solve the problem when it's an actual problem, a lot more stressful than putting the problem in hypothetical parameters. So, that's the activity flow is related to giving people the chance to bring up dissent. But it's also backed by research. I mean, there was a study done called Prospective Hindsight in 1989, a series of academics. What they found is that when you give people the chance to put themselves in the future, they're actually 30% more likely to correctly identify the reason something might go wrong. So not only are you giving people the chance to bring up their concerns and fears in a way that won't necessarily feel like punishment, but you're also potentially identifying what could be the crack or what could be the chink in the armor that leads to the strategy or the plan or the agreement that you put together. You can get ahead of that, and you can talk about it in a sense that feels like you've collaborated around a solution versus having to just wait until it happens.
Yeah. We all know every plan that we put forward, something will go wrong. So this is really planning for the reality. And what people find themselves in is when something does go wrong, they say, it doesn't feel like the world is on fire. It feels like this is something that I saw coming, and that, hey, we've actually had a conversation about what to do in it, rather than, getting stuck in the tension of being in the state of things going wrong. So I think this conversation is really important to have. How can leaders walk their teams through this conversation? How can they, start the topic of how might we fail?
Yeah, I think it's simple. I think it's approaching the conversation with expectations for everyone to hear each other out. I think listening and being willing to suspend judgment become the core behavioral principles that underlie this activity. And if you cannot agree to those as a team, you'll find yourselves needing to take a lot of water breaks as you go through this. And I would say, Madison, I'd love, again, as sitting in the participant seat as we went through this pressure testing exercise internally, what were some of those things that popped up that you feel like could be good to know for folks who might be tuning into this?
Yeah, I think this is the point in the conversation where our team was surfacing emotions and hard conversations, and we found ourselves like really grappling with conversations that need to be had. So how can people go into this conversation? I think definitely lean into the purpose of this, and recognize that it will be a hard conversation, but it does serve a good purpose, and you can really, I think, lead, better understand one another, and then lead through that tension by I think surfacing those hard emotions. So I think my best advice, and like what I saw you do really well, would be to really like lean into that and anticipate it. You're anticipating failures, anticipate those failures to be hard conversations. Don't shy away from them. Don't go to the next objective item, but clear the rest of the time and have a conversation about what comes up.
Yeah, absolutely. Madison, I think that is a really great segue into our fourth and final conversation of the toolkit. And just to flash this back up so everyone can be reminded, so we've gone through discovering, exploring, and pressure testing, and now we're getting into creating a working agreement, which is really around what are the simple things that we commit to doing? What are the simple things that we are committing to not do, as well as putting some feedback loops in place to ensure that we can come back and revisit strategy plan as we learn new information. So Madison, as we think about this last conversation, we've been through a lot of what you would maybe call a more divergent style of conversations, exploring what's possible, talking about and brainstorming what are challenges and solutions to those. What should people keep in mind as they get into this fourth conversation around creating a simple working agreement that can be effective and revisited for their team?
Yeah. This is really where, like you said, the divergence really starts to converge on, okay, what's our action? What are we committing to? And what is really important to do is to pull through the great ideas that you have heard team members come up with in the prior conversations, even in like the hallway conversations that come out of them, or the, if you're not in person, then in the Zoom conversations. Like really keep a good track of the great ideas that have been generated and set those forward as you set out to create a working agreement. It's also really important to recognize here is that we have been in the space of creating ideas, building empathy, building understanding. If we stay in that space, we need to stay in the space of empathy, but we do need to narrow in on a solution. And what that means is that there will be real compromises that people make. I think that compromise can be it cannot be a fun word. I think when people think of compromise, they think, oh, I'm giving something up. And so what I know we've been talking about a lot is that a lot of the company policies that we're seeing are saying on the bell curve of responses, there were people who said they wanted to go in 5 days a week, and there were people who said they wanted to go in 0 days a week. So it's going to be 2 to 3 days a week. And that is not a good compromise. Those people on either side, neither of them are getting what they want. So in this space, it's really about thinking creatively about what you might do. So in this example, we said, what if there was 1 week a month or 1 week a quarter where people came in and they were able to have those collaborative strategic conversations. So getting creative with that, not just landing in the middle of whatever the two answers were, but really thinking bigger than that. That's an example. There are so many other ways that you can think creatively. And Griff, I see a smile on your face. My favorite example of kind of how to think about this compromise was an anecdote I heard from a professor years ago, which is that there is a man and his daughter was sick, and the only thing to cure her was the rind of an orange. But unfortunately, the orange supply had been devastated, and there was only one orange left. There was another man whose wife was also sick with a different ailment, and she needed the juice of an orange. And so these two guys were deciding who is going to get this one orange that is left in the world. And as they're coming up with solutions, it was I need the whole orange. My situation is more dire, and I need it. And they were going back and forth on this. Of how do we decide if this guy gets the juice of the orange or this guy gets the rind? And really the solution is that you're not going to split the orange in half. That won't be enough for what the two people need. It's you're not going to give it to one person or the other, but you're just going to simply take the rind off the orange and take the guts of the orange and split it that way. I feel like a lot of people are have this tension of one party needs to win, or there needs to be one way of being, but there is a more creative solution. Sometimes it's as simple as taking the rind off the orange and putting it in 2 pieces. But right off the bat, when you're fighting about who gets what, or if we're going to split it down the middle, that's not going to be the conversation that gets you there.
All right. So if you remember nothing else, listeners and followers, don't just split the orange down the middle. Think about who needs the rind and who needs the juice.
So
all right,
thank you for riding out my orange analogy. I was excited.
No, I think it's a really good, I love analogies. I think it's a really good way to think about reorienting our predisposition to compromise. So Madison, we're coming up towards the end of our session. It's been a lot of fun having this conversation with you, and I know we're both really passionate about this. What would you say would be a call to action? How can people get their hands on this toolkit to bring to their teams or to their functions?
I know, every member of Thoughtium, ourselves included, are really passionate about this topic. We are in client conversations, in conversations with friends, peers, family members about what this looks like. So I think we all have a vested interest, and I know that we're available to have these conversations, to ask that hard question, Griff, that you teed up with, where can I start? What's the best conversation for my team to have? Or how can I really do this with what's been set forward by my company so far? So definitely the call to action is to think about how you can start these conversations with your team. And we'll be releasing a overview of those conversations so that you can really, you can lead them up yourself starting tomorrow. You can give us a call and ask us how you might do it. But we're here for those conversations.
I love it. So reach out to us, and we'll definitely be willing to have the conversation. And I think, the only thing I'd add to that is reach out to us. And if you would like to know more about how to do these conversations, but also reach out to us and let us know how they go. I mean, we definitely are, again, we are saying this is an experimentation. No one really has the right answer yet. I think the more we can share and the more we can talk about both the wins we have and the lessons we learn, the better we're all going to be able to face all this uncertainty in front of us. The last thing I know, Madison, we wanted to share with folks who are tuning in, who may or may not believe that we actually went through this exercise together. We do want to just share a little bit of our output. And so you can see on the left, kind of became our team mantra, the practice what we teach. How do we work that into how not only we work with our clients and customers, but individually, how we work together. And it led to a series of 6 commitments that came out of that 4th conversation. You can see creating the space for courage, assuming good intent, understanding impact, making decisions with equity in mind, leading with empathy, trust and compassion, giving and receiving feedback with intention, and committing to rumbles, which if you'd like to know more about rumbles, we definitely can have that conversation as well. And our last one being alignment at times can be greater than agreement and understanding the difference. So here's what we came up with. Please, Madison.
About what we landed on this is there are not days in the week or days in a month. There is not when this is happening, an if-then statement. It's commitments about how we're working with each other. And these types of conversations are what comes out of elevating your team and having this conversation rather than reaching a number. So this is really what the output is about how we can work together in the future of our work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So this concludes our Thoughtium Perspectives series, Work in Progress. One of the things we wanted to just offer up again, as you think about going through either these conversations or separate conversations, a couple of things we want to make available. One is if you go to thoughttium.com/perspectives, you'll see some of the things that are really top of mind for us. Again, we've curated a lot of insights, but we've also just put a lot of our thoughts out there. We're trying to start this as a conversation. So feel free to go there and check out what is top of mind in the Thoughtium world, but also reach out to us directly. If you have questions or comments or would like some advice on running these conversations with your team, feel free to reach out either to me or Madison. Both of us I'm at grift@thougtium.com. Madison is at madison@thougtium.com. Definitely reach out. We'd love to have a conversation with you all as you go through this process with your team. So again, thanks for tuning in. We will be back with Navigating Now. We're going to give the microphone begrudgingly back to our good friend, Anthony Ewing, to lead a really strong conversation next Thursday, again at 3 p.m. Central. This one's going to be called Talking Shop, Ingredients to Running a Successful Small Business. And we're bringing in Delano Saparu, who is a CNBC contributor. He's going to be giving his insight on what it means to run a successful small business. Again, that'll be next Thursday at 3 p.m. Central. So again, thanks everyone for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed not just this episode, but the 3-part perspective series. You can find all the recordings of these 3 episodes up on our YouTube channel. And we look forward to not only continuing the conversation around work in progress, but continuing the broader discussion. We hope you have a good rest of your Thursday, a great Friday, a great weekend. And again, reach out to us if you ever want to have a conversation about taking these to your team. Thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you next time.